Can you take a look of our security and let us know what we should be worried about? If you have worked in IT for any real amount of time, you know exactly what that message feels like. It is technically your job, but the request is so wide open, you do not know where to grab it. Do you start with the firewall, the domain controllers? Do you pull up the NIST framework and try to work through it end to end? Open a spreadsheet and list every risk you can think of? None of those options feels obviously wrong, and none of them feels obviously right. Here's the thing. That paralysis is not a skill gap. It is a framework gap. Most IT professionals we work with can run a SIEM, harden a server, read a packet capture. What they do not have is a repeatable way to decide what matters first, which threats to prioritize, which controls actually earn their place in the environment. That is exactly what the threat and control method is built to fix. And over the next few minutes, we are going to walk through the whole shape of it. So, why does this happen? Why do smart, experienced IT people freeze the moment security lands on their plate? The answer is how cybersecurity is usually thought. Walk into any cybersecurity training, any certification study guide, any vendor conference, you will hear the same three ideas repeated. Learn the tools, memorize the frameworks, follow the checklists. That advice is not wrong. It is just deeply incomplete. Tools change, frameworks get updated, checklists get outdated the moment a new attack technique hits the wild. What does not change is the decision-making process that a defender uses to figure out what to do next. And that is exactly what most curricula skip. The result is an industry full of professionals who can pass an exam on CIS controls version 8, but freeze the first time the business leader asks them, so what should we actually work on this quarter? They can list the domains of a CISSP outline, but they cannot tell you which two controls matter most for a mid-sized company running a mixed cloud environment. That is not a knowledge problem. That is a reasoning problem. So, what is the threat and control method? It is a four-phase decision process for defending any IT environment against cyber threats. It moves in a deliberate order: inventory, threats, controls, scale. And each phase produces a specific artifact that feeds into the next. Now, the point of the method is not to hand you another framework to memorize. NIST CSSP, ISO 27001, CIS controls, MITRE ATT&CK. Those already exist. They are excellent references. The threat and control method sits on top of those references. It gives you a way to actually use them. It answers the question the frameworks do not. Given everything you could do, what should you do first? And why? And it does not care whether you are protecting a small business, a hospital, a fintech, a startup, or a manufacturing plant. The same reasoning applies to every environment, because the underlying question is always the same. What do we have? What can go wrong? What do we do about it? And how do we keep doing it consistently? Before we go deeper, let us be honest about what this method is not, because clarity here saves you from the wrong expectations. It is not a replacement for ISO 27000, NIST CSF, CIS controls, or any other established framework. Those exist for a good reason. They are the accumulated work of standards bodies with decades of institutional expertise. Any serious security program touches at least one of them. The threat and control method does not compete with them. It gives IT professionals a way to actually reason with them. It is also not a new discovery. Nothing about it is patented, proprietary, or reinvented. Asset inventory, threat modeling, control selections, continuous improvement. The security industry has been circling these ideas for decades. What the method contributes is not the pieces, it is the specific order, the specific outputs, and the specific way of teaching it that makes the whole thing usable by someone coming from IT. And it is definitely not a promise of a SOC job in 90 days, or a shortcut around real work, or a magic key that opens the cybersecurity career on its own. What it offers is more useful than that. A way to understand cybersecurity, apply it in your current environment, and use it as a track to grow into the role you actually want. The method is a way of thinking. What you build with it is up to you. So, where this actually came from? The threat and control method did not start as a product. It started around 2010 in an office at CA Technologies, where a coworker who had come over from Novell asked me to teach him cybersecurity. They agreed to a series of informal in-person sessions after the work. But there was a problem. Cybersecurity thought that the normal way is not something you can hand to a busy IT engineer over a few evenings. Policies, governance, guidelines, standards. The field is enormous, and most of the material is written for people who already work inside it. The coworker did not need to become a policy analyst. He needed a way to look at his environment on Monday morning and start defending it. So the goal became to sketch out something simpler. A small number of questions, asked in a specific order, that an IT professional could actually apply. There was no name for it yet, no course. It was just a way to make cybersecurity teachable. Over the years that followed, the same sequence got tested on other coworkers at CA, then on customers, then on colleagues at IBM. And what became clear across all those settings was that the reasoning held up. It worked across industry, across environments, across levels of experience. At some point, the pattern earned a name and became the threat and control method. All right, let us walk the 4 phases. Phase 1, inventory. Every defender who has ever failed at their job failed because of a blind spot. Some system was running that nobody remembered installing it. Some account was still active for an employee who left 2 years ago. Some subdomain was pointing to a cloud resource that had been deprovisioned. Attackers do not break in through what you protect. They break in through what you forgot. Inventory is the first phase because it is the foundation the entire rest of analysis stands on. It is the phase you build a working picture of what actually exists in your environment. Assets, identities, data, dependencies. And, this is the part that most people miss, the controls that are already in place. You are not just cataloging what you own. You are mapping the current security posture. Because you cannot decide what to add until you know what is already there. The output is what we call an asset inventory, but that undersells it, because a real inventory is more than a spreadsheet with host names. It is a business-aware picture of what matters, what it depends on, and what is currently defending it. Getting this right is boring and glamorous work, and it is the single highest leverage thing an IT professional can do when they step into the cybersecurity role. Phase 2, threats. Once you know what you have, the next question is, what can go wrong? Not in the abstract, not like ransomware is bad, not like phishing is common. Those statements are true, but they do not help you to make decisions. Threat analysis has to be specific to your environment, your assets, your business context. This is where most self-taught defenders get lost. They open MITRE ATT&CK, they see 14 tactics, hundreds of techniques, and they try to map every possible attack path against every possible asset. That approach produces a beautiful matrix and zero actionable insight. The threat and control method takes the different route. Instead of asking what could theoretically happen, we work through a tighter set of questions. Which of our assets, if compromised, would materially hurt the business? What are the realistic paths an attacker would take to reach those assets? And which of those paths are cheapest and easiest for the attacker to execute today? You are not trying to enumerate every threat in existence. You are trying to identify the small number of threats that matter enough to actually spend resources on. The output is a threat model and prioritized environment-specific view of what is actually likely to hurt you. This is the artifact that lets you have a real conversation with leadership about risk. Not we are exposed to ransomware. Everyone is exposed to ransomware. But these three specific paths are how ransomware would most likely land in our environment. And here is what we would do to stop each one. Phase 3, controls. By the time you reach this phase, half of the work is already done. You know what you have, you know what can go wrong. Now you make decisions about what to defend, how, and in what order. Most people think of security controls as a shopping list. Buy an EDR, deploy an MFA, turn on logging, install a WAF. Those are all valid controls, and the method is not opposed to any of them. But treating controls as a shopping list is what leads to environments with 15 overlapping tools. None of them configure properly, and none of them actually stopping the threads that matter. For each priority thread from the previous phase, you evaluate the range of controls that could address it. Then you choose, based on a specific set of criteria, how effective is the control against that specific threat? What does it cost to operate over time? How does it fit with what is already in the environment? How does it hold up when the environment changes? The goal is not a fortress. The goal is a defensive security posture that organization can actually operate, sustain, and explain to a board. The output is a security plan, concrete, prioritized, and notice this word, with reasoning. A security plan without stated reasoning is just a to-do list, and to-do lists get ignored the moment the next fire starts. Phase 4, scale. This is the phase that separates a good defender from someone who can defend at any scale in any environment over time. Scale is not about buying bigger tools, it is about turning the reasoning you just used, inventory, threads, controls, into a process the team can run again and again and again without losing quality. Cybersecurity is not a one-time project. Environments change constantly. New assets get spun up. New employees join. New threats emerge. New business initiatives introduce new risks. A method that works once and then rots is not a method. It is a snapshot. The scale phase asks, how do you keep the reasoning alive? How often do you revisit your inventory? How do you detect shifts in the threat landscape? How does the whole cycle run as a rhythm rather than a sprint? The output is a repeatable decision process that the organization owns. That is the real product of a method, not a document, not a diagram, a way of thinking that survives long after any specific tool, framework, or job title. Now, here's the part most people miss. The 4 phases look simple on paper, but the order is what makes the method work. You cannot analyze threats against assets you have not inventoried. You cannot choose controls for threats you have not analyzed. You cannot scale a process you have not defined. Every phase is a prerequisite for the next one, and it's tempting to skip, especially to jump straight to controls, because controls feel like action, and IT is a culture of action. But controls without threats analysis are guesses. Threats without inventory are hypothetical. Scale without a process is chaos. The order is deliberate. And skipping steps is exactly how organizations end up with expensive security programs that do not actually reduce risk. So, if you have made it this far, you have probably noticed something. None of this requires a computer science degree, a decade in SOC, or a stack of 6-figure certifications. What it requires is a way of thinking, applied consistently. That is exactly why this method is built for people transitioning from IT. You already know the environments. You already understand the systems. You already have the operational context that pure security graduates often lack. What you are missing is a defensive reasoning framework, a repeatable way to look at any environment and make good decisions about how to defend it. The professionals we see thrive in this transition are not the ones who memorize the most tools. They are the ones who learned to think in this specific sequence: inventory, threads, controls, scale, and then apply it to whatever environment came their way. That is a skill that scales across the roles, industries, technology stacks, and it's the skill that hiring managers, auditors, and business leaders actually evaluate when they decide whether someone is really operating at a security level. Look, the field is not asking you to abandon what you already know. It is asking you to apply a new way of thinking to it. The threat and control method gives you that thinking in a structure that has been tested against real environments and real threats. Cybersecurity is not rocket science. It is discipline of clear reasoning applied to a complex systems in a repeatable way. When you learn to think like a defender, the tools, frameworks, and certifications stop looking like a wall and start looking like what they actually are: instruments you can pick up and use once you know what you are trying to do. If you want to actually run the method, not just hear about it, we go much deeper in the full Blue Team Academy course. The specific criteria we use to prioritize threats, the decision framework for choosing controls, the templates and walkthroughs across cloud, hybrid, and on-prem stacks. Link is in the description. And if you want more of this, breaking down how IT experience translates into cybersecurity work, hit subscribe and join the Keep IT Safe newsletter. Both links are below. See you in the next one.